First, I'd like to give all praises unto Yahweh, Ba'ashem Yahushai, and double honors unto the apostles and elders of GreatMillStone, and honors to you brothers out there in the highways and the byways, teaching this word in all sincerity and in truth. And basically, in this video, I just want to, this is mainly gonna go into the transatlantic slave trade, and just to show you how these various so-called European countries, which are all establishments of the Edomites, the people who are known in the Bible as the Edomites, all have a price to pay, not just America. You know, whether you're talking about Britain, France, Germany, you know, all these different countries in the EU, they all have a price to pay. All right. You know, all these different Edomite factions and groups and nations, they all have a price to pay, going back to the slave trade, go back to the colonial period, which has led into the period we are today. Because basically what's happened is, you Israelites, you so-called Negroes, Hispanics, and Native American Indians have been spoiled and conquered as a people. You've been stripped of your resources and your authority and your power in your own lands. And added on to that, you're now subject onto being nothing more than a human resource for the profit of these Edomites and their various corporations and establishments. Okay, it doesn't matter where you go. The entire West Indies is a bunch of slave colonies. All right, all over the Americas, they're all establishments which was set up as slave colonies, man. And to this very day, the profits of those countries in the Americas are fed into the different EU countries through the children of these Edomites who rule and control those various countries in the Americas, man. Like take Brazil, for instance. The children of the slaves, the children of the natives, are still in the lowest socio-economic brackets, whereas the children of the slave masters and the Edomite descendants are in the top socio-economic brackets and are benefiting the most from those societies. All right, so this is Isaiah 42:22. It says, "But this is a people robbed and spoiled," which is why you Israelites, you so-called Negroes, Hispanics, and Native American Indians reside, no matter where you are, from whether you're in the Americas, the Caribbean, whether you're in Europe, no matter where you are, you reside in the lowest socio-economic group, because you're a people that's been robbed and spoiled. They are all snared in holes. You're trapped in a system where you will never progress out of that socio-economic status that you're in. Let's take America, for instance. You so-called Negroes, Hispanics, and Native American Indians, as a people, will never make up the majority of the highest socio-economic groups, because you're snared in a system which is designed to use you for the betterment of the Edomites, and that's it. It says they are hid in prison houses, right? They are for a prey and none delivereth. You are being preyed upon as nothing more than a human resource, a guinea pig, something to be used for the betterment of others. Whatever industry you're in, you're being used, but who controls and owns that industry? Edomites. Whether you're talking about the music industry, the car industry, no matter what industry you look to, Edomites own and control that industry, and you Israelites work in that industry. Okay? And none delivereth, for spoil, and none saith restore, because ain't no one looking to restore back to you your lands and your wealth and your authority. Who among you will give ear to this? Who will hearken and hear for the time to come? Who gave Jacob for a spoil and Israel to the robbers? Did not the Lord hear against whom we have sinned? And the reason why these different nations, beginning with these Edomites, were allowed to rob us and spoil us because we sinned against the Heavenly Father, man. For they would not walk in his ways, neither were they obedient unto his law. Therefore he hath poured upon him the fury of his anger and the strength of battle, and have set him on fire round about. Yet he knew not, and it burned him, yet he laid it not to heart. Because the majority of you Israelites, not only do you not understand the reality of the situation that you're in, you don't understand why you're in your situation that you're in. And that's why you give heed to the false hope that these Edomites give you, that you can make it in his society, that you and your people can progress in this man's society, when this man's society and system is not designed for you to progress. Economically, it's not designed that way. It's designed for them to progress and for you to serve them in that progression. And that's it. All right. So I want to read this article, and it's going to name a few names, man. And this is just based upon the transatlantic slave trade. It says, given that the transatlantic slave trade was a global phenomenon in which a large number of European states took part. All right, so all these European states are guilty, and that's why the Lord is going to bring great judgment on all these European states, beginning with World War III. World War III is going to bring a lot of death and destruction to all these European states and these Edomites that are in it. It said it is worth looking at their respective roles within it, and how these different countries have dealt with the memory and the commemoration of slavery, which we don't care about how they deal with the memory and the commemoration, because they're going to pay. The Lord going to give a damn about whether you remember or not. Despite the resonances of slavery and its importance historically to Europe, there are still remarkably few memorials, although there have been recent developments in France and a series of memorials and exhibitions in the Netherlands and Denmark. Countries such as Spain and Portugal that have been so active in both territorial expansion to the Caribbean and Latin America and transatlantic slavery seem to have done little to promote the collective memory of these tragic episodes in their history. But that's all right, because they're all going to pay anyway. It says internationally, I don't want to go into no damn recognition. Let's jump down. France was a major player in the slave trade, and many of its cities in the West Coast, such as Nantes and Lorient and La Rochelle and Bordeaux, have built their wealth through the triangle slave trade. Slaves on French vessels were mainly taken to French Caribbean islands such as Saint-Dominique and Martinique. In addition, France is also notorious for introducing Code Noir, a decree in 1685 providing formal regulations for the treatment of slaves, governing their lives, deaths, freedoms, religion, and how they were bought and sold. This gruesome document served to dehumanize the enslaved Israelites even more by institutionalizing the trade in Israelites even further. France eventually outlawed the slave trade in 1830 and slavery itself in 1848, which they didn't outlaw the slave trade based upon any form of righteousness. It's just that there was no need anymore to trade slaves, to move slaves from West Africa to the Americas, because they already had lots of slaves. They already had lots of that human resource, and these slaves were reproducing. So they outlawed the slave trade, and then what they did was they outlawed chattel slavery. All right, but those chattel slaves were still slaves. They were still nothing more than human resources, wage slaves, to be abused by Edomites for low wages, even unto this very day. They're still in the same socio-economic condition. And instead of being owned by a particular plantation owner, they're now owned by the state in which they are a so-called citizen. Let's not play these games. It says in France, because when they abolished slavery, what changed? Nothing changed. They still had to work on the same plantations, and they still had to accept whatever their slave owners gave them, whether it was a penny, whether it was 5 pence. And if they didn't want to accept that pay, what the hell could they do? They didn't have their own resources. They didn't have their own power, their own authority. It says in France, as in most European countries, okay, that's it on that. So France is going to get it. The Netherlands, despite the fact that there were not many slaves in the Dutch colonies, which the Dutch did hella wickedness in Africa to our people that are in there, the Israelites that were living in Africa. They did hella wickedness, man. So the Dutch are going to have to pay. The Netherlands, nevertheless, played an important role in the slave trade, in particular by transporting slaves to various territories. In the 17th century, the Dutch were pioneers in navigation and global trade, which led them to be at the forefront of the shipping and trading of enslaved Israelites. 540,000 Israelite slaves are estimated to have been taken to the Americas by the Dutch. In addition, through their colony in Suriname, they were responsible for setting up another slave traffic route east between the Cape of Good Hope and their colony in Indonesian archipelago. Slavery was formally abolished in 1863, although their involvement in the Dutch in the slave trade had already started to diminish by the end of the 18th century, and that was all due to economics. Okay, the movement for that was it on that. Denmark and Norway. As with the Netherlands, the Kingdom of Denmark, Norway did not have many colonies and was involved mainly in the trade of slaves through its forts on the Gold Coast of Ghana. The most famous of being Fort Fredensborg in Fetu. It was also actively shipping Israelite slaves across the Caribbean. It estimated that around 85,000 enslaved Israelites were shipped on Danish boats between 1669 and 1806. Although Denmark-Norway was the first European country to abolish the exports of slaves, it wasn't until 13 July 1848 that slavery was abolished in the Danish West Indian colonies, now the US Virgin Islands. Oh boy, Portugal and Spain. Portugal was the first European country to trade in Israelites from Africa, initially mainly to bring them back to Portugal. There were 32,000 Israelite slaves in Portugal in the 16th century, working mainly in the fields and sugar plantation. Soon, however, the demand for slaves in Brazil was such that the majority of slaves were taken there. And that's why you got a lot of Judah, Benjamin, and Levi amongst Asher over there in Brazil. Spain had North African slaves as early as the 15th century, and with its expansion into the Caribbean and Central Latin America, it soon started importing slaves from Africa. However, unlike Portugal, Spain did not have forts in Africa and therefore relied on other European slave trading countries to provide their colonies with slaves. The slave trade ended in 1867 with a last ship arrived in Cuba, and slavery was abolished in 1886. Alright, so that's just a little information. Basically, all these European nations were involved in one way, shape, or another in not only the slave trade, but also in colonialism. Because a lot of the parts in Africa that they colonized, you had Israelites there. And they were putting hell on them Israelites over there, even in Africa. And that's a big part how all these different nations gain their wealth. Alright? You know, the rise of capitalism and the development of Europe. Alright? So these nations, all these different European nations are going to pay. All these Edomites, man, are going to pay, man, because their place in the first world, their socio-economic status that they enjoy over the nations and in this world is as a direct result of the spoiling, the robbery, and the oppression of the Israelites even unto this very day. Like I said, man, you go to any one of these South American countries, the people with the wealth in those countries are all Edomites. The majority of them are all Edomites. They're the descendants of Edomites that went over there and oppressed them people from the very beginning. Now they're calling themselves Mexican. Now they're calling themselves Brazilian. But they're really Edomites. They're not natives. And them working hand in hand with the European countries and their corporations, which are using the resources to their benefit. While our people, the Israelites, languish in the lowest socio-economic order all over the world. Okay? Even in Africa, our people that are still scattered in Africa are still over there suffering in Nigeria and in Ghana, while the Edomite is making all the money. So guess what, man? Alright? All you Edomites and all your countries are going to be demolished. You're going to be brought down. you're going to have to pay. All right? You're going to be destroyed. You're going to be spoiled. In fact, there was one I wanted to get. I should have got that one. Jeremiah 30:16. Therefore, all that devour thee shall be devoured. So it ain't just the Edomite in America. It's the Edomite all over the world. The Edomites that are in South America. All these Edomites have played their part in devouring the nation of Israel and these heathen. And all thine adversaries, every one of them shall go into captivity, and they that spoil thee shall be a spoil, and all they that prey upon thee will I give for a prey. Right? So we're going to spoil these different nations. We're going to prey upon these different nations, all of them. And all their cities and all their establishments that they've built up off our backs are going to be destroyed. They're going to be brought to naught. They're going to be made a full end of. They're going to be in desolation. All right? And part of that is going to come through the way of this world war. And then the Lord himself is going to come with the chariots and finish all. Look, man, since these people have established all these cities and these institutions and these businesses and this infrastructure, the Lord is going to destroy it all, man. In the kingdom of heaven, there's not going to be a remnant of anything that these heathens have built. They're going to have to, after 1,000 years, they're going to have to go back and rebuild their nations from scratch under our rule. The Lord ain't going to preserve Germany. The Lord ain't going to preserve Britain. Nothing from this side of the world is going to be preserved. Fuck it. All their mansions and everything is going to be destroyed. All their companies, all their infrastructure, all their roads. Isaiah 34:1. Come near ye nations to hear, and hearken ye people. Let the earth hear, and all that is therein, the world and all things that come forth of it. For the indignation of the Lord is upon all nations, right? Especially all these Edomite nations, and his fury upon all their armies. He hath utterly destroyed them, he hath delivered them to the slaughter. Their slain also shall be cast out, and their stink shall come up out of their carcasses, and mountains shall be melted with their blood, and all the hosts of heaven shall be dissolved. All these capitals, man, they're going to be destroyed, man, whether it's Berlin, London, Paris, they're going to be completely destroyed, man. Their pride is going to lead to their shame. All right, and all the hosts of heaven shall be dissolved, and the heavens shall be rolled together of a scroll, and their whole shall fall down as the leaf falleth from the vine, and as the falling fig from the fig tree. For my sword shall be bathed in heaven. Behold, it shall come down on Idumea, because they're the main nation that's going to get it, the Edomites, and upon the people of my curse to judgment. And the sword of the Lord is filled with blood. It is made fat with fatness, and with the blood of lambs and goats, with the fat of the kidney of rams. For the Lord hath a sacrifice in Bozrah, and a great slaughter in the land of Idumea. Now that slaughter is going to happen to everywhere where these Edomites are, but mainly in America, because America is going to be completely leveled and destroyed and made an example of for all eternity. But all their other cities and their other nations, they're going to be leveled too. Their buildings are going to be brought to the ground. It's just that that land is not going to be completely destroyed and uninhabitable. And the unicorn shall come down with them, and the bullocks with the bulls, and their land shall be soaked with blood, and their dust shall be made fat with fatness. For it is the day of the Lord's vengeance, and the year of recompenses for the controversy of Zion. So all these nations, beginning with these Edomites, are going to pay for the robbery and the spoilage and the oppression of the Israelites, man. Beginning with the transatlantic slavery and everything on downwards, even unto this very day, because our people are still being oppressed, man, and still being spoiled. Facts. There's going to be a recompense. And all these Edomites that have been living high on the hog, so to speak, man, in Brazil, in Argentina, in Colombia, in America, in Britain, they're going to be brought low. So if that, I'm going to say shalom.